Hey there friends, and welcome to LaughNapkin. My name is Frank, and today we're looking at two stories from r/Prorevenge. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I'm the landlord for some apartments in the city. I sign the lease agreements and go over the basics with tenants, although they don't usually want me to spend hours delving into the fine print. 99% of the time, it's a breeze, and everything is fine. One lady, let's call her Karen, had been paying her rent via a new bank account and new checks for the last several months. All of a sudden, we got several chargeback fees on our account. She had put a stop payment on the checks and closed the account. I immediately called her. Me. Hey, Karen, it looks like your checks bounced for the last few months. I just want to make sure everything's okay. Oh no, I promise I'll get this fixed. Okay, you've been a good tenant in the past, so I'll give you a month. Needless to say, a month passed and she didn't pay, so I called her again. Hey, Karen, we still haven't received payments, so I'm afraid we'll have to file for eviction. Oh God, no. I'm an old woman. I can't afford to be evicted. I'm trying so hard to pay. Can you give me another shot? As long as you pay before the court date, the eviction doesn't have to go through. The court date arrives, and guess who hasn't paid yet? At court, the judge rules for a 24-hour notice to vacate. Karen, in tears, comes up to me afterwards. Karen, can you please give me another chance? I can't afford to go anywhere else. I'm sorry, Karen, but the only way I could do that is if you pay off the debt, sign a new lease agreement, plus first month's rent, plus a security deposit. And I don't think that's going to happen. Goodbye. So I left, and thought that was that. My maintenance guy would come in a few days and do the inspection and clean up, and then we'd put it on the market. He shows up a few days later, and there's a problem. They're still there. So I call the sheriff and schedule a set out. A problem though. According to the sheriff, the 24-hour notice was no longer valid, as we had struck up a deal afterwards. So the court had reversed the eviction decision. I had no recollection of having decided this would happen. I called the court, and they informed me that the eviction was no longer valid, as apparently I told the sheriff I was giving her more time, invalidating the decision, etc. What actually happened was Karen had called the sheriff and told him that the court had reversed the decision because of a non-existent deal. She had then called the court and told him that the sheriff could not evict her as I had waived the notice, and she had used my words, twisting my denial of an extension into a deal. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. I sent Karen a copy of a new lease agreement, asking for the debts in addition to rent for the first month and a new security deposit. Her lawyer then contacted me. Yes, she had the money to hire a lawyer somehow, informing me that, in fact, her old lease agreement was still valid, as my deal, the one that would require a new lease agreement, invalidated the eviction decision. So I filed for eviction, on the grounds that she had not paid for several months now, 5 to be exact, and therefore had invalidated her old lease agreement. And then I read her old lease agreements. I already know these contracts pretty well, but like I said, I don't usually delve into the minutiae. This time, I did. We show up at court. Karen has her lawyer. Karen is bursting, grinning like a fool like she's won the lottery. Her lawyer looks fairly happy as well. The judge asked me to speak. Me. I would like Karen to leave the apartments, but she's refusing despite the fact that according to the court's last decision, she should have left over a month ago now. Judge. And Miss Karen? Lawyer. Miss Karen cannot be ejected from her home without a new notice. Yes, she has not yet paid past due rent. However, she and the landlord struck up a deal, giving her the time she needed to pay via verbal agreement. This deal, made directly after the last court date, invalidated the last decision. So Miss Karen will require a new decision and therefore a new notice before she can rightfully be evicted from her home. Until then, her lease agreement is still valid. Blah blah blah, insert legal crap. Judge. And landlord, what do you have to say? Me. Well, Your Honor, I have to agree. They made a very compelling argument. Karen and I did indeed make a deal, giving her the time she needed to pay. And yes, her old lease agreement is still valid, I guess. But according to the terms of the still valid lease, there are some additional things that the court needs to be aware of that I'd like to go over for clarification. I'm sure you have a copy, Your Honor. Judge: Yes, I do. And you have a copy, lawyer? Yes, I do. Excellent. Well, Your Honor, if you look at Section 4, subsection A on page 2, you'll see that after 10 days of non-payment, a late fee of $100 is applied. If you continue reading to subsection B, you'll see that after 15 days of non-payment, additional late fees of $10 per day are applied until full payment is rendered. If you continue to subsection C, you'll see that failed payments necessitate a chargeback fee of $50 per failed payment. If you will continue, Your Honor, to page 4, section 7, subsection F, you'll see that if a tenant is in any way responsible for a loss of rent, including leaving an apartment in less than move-in ready condition, failed payments, or lastly, refusal to vacate in the case of an eviction, the tenant is responsible for payment of said loss of rent, in addition to any other debts owed. In addition, on page 8, section 4, subsection A, you'll note that the tenant is responsible for any and all legal fees resultant from the eviction process, including attorney fees, such as for the attorney I hired to help me review this lease agreement. Finally, on page 10, the last page, section 7, subsection B, you'll see that the tenant is responsible for all HVAC services rendered on their unit. As we sent in a company to fix the unit in Karen's apartment at her request, we have the invoice here for the replacement unit, in addition to the totals for all the fees listed. At this point, the lawyer has gone completely pale. It's clear he was more concerned that I would fight the whole deal thing than the terms of the lease he thought he'd have to fight to keep valid. Karen looks utterly shell-shocked, her mouth slightly agape like a child confused by a game of peekaboo. The judge, meanwhile, is completely unfazed, until I hand her the invoice alongside my maths, a spreadsheet, and a piece of paper with the total debt owed circled and highlighted at the bottom of the page. Her eyes widened to the size of her mouth as her jaw dropped with an audible gasp. Me: As you can see, Your Honor, the total owed is excess of $16,000. I will happily accept payment in the form of a cashier's check. I'd hate to have to charge yet another $50 fee for failed payment should another personal check bounce. Judge: Lawyer, do you have anything to say? At this point, the lawyer looks like he's about to pass out. Karen seems to have stopped breathing. The judge remains silent for a moment, and then collects herself. Judge: I'm afraid you'll have to address that matter of debt in a different court than this one, landlord. We're only here to judge whether Miss Karen is to be evicted from her home today. Me: Oh, if she wants to stay, I'd be happy to let her, as long as she agrees to continue to abide by the terms of the lease agreement, specifically those clauses outlined above, and pays the debt owed today. Judge: I'm going to rule for a 24-hour notice of vacate unless Miss Karen can produce payment at this moment. Karen sits, still, quiet, speechless even. Her lawyer is eyeing the window. I like to think contemplating his decisions in life that led him to this point. Maybe thinking about jumping. I don't know. Judge: Right, a 24-hour notice to vacate. And landlord? Yes? You'll want to file those charges in small claims court, or a higher court if it exceeds the amount that you can legally pursue in small claims. Already filed, Your Honor. This case has now been solved, and needless to say, I got a fairly significant bonus in addition to a slight raise. This happened shortly after college. My mom is a retired disabled woman who now owns her house on a quiet residential cul-de-sac. She has lived there longer than anyone else. Her neighborhood has designated parking spaces at the end of the cul-de-sac, all with the addresses of each house painted in the parking space. My mom doesn't get out much, so I use her designated parking space. At the time, we lived in the same city, and I visited her weekly to bring groceries, fix broken things, cook for her, etc. My mom parked her car in the backyard of her house since she went out so little. Mom kept busy by gardening or baking/buying cookies for the children on the street. Mom's neighbor, Ivy, never parked well. Whenever I stopped by, her car was always parked so close to my car that I had to park on the curb. I wouldn't have cared about Ivy's piss-poor parking if it wasn't for two things. 1. She had 4 or 5 kids and had parties almost every weekend, leaving trash in my mom's yard. 2. I loved my car. A 2016 metallic ice blue Dodge Challenger Hellcat. The first car I had ever purchased brand new. I washed that car once a week, detailed the interior, and had rules against eating, drinking, or even leaving trash in my car. It was my pride and joy. Mom had called the police throughout Ivy's residence because of the parties. Ivy's guests would fill up the cul-de-sac with their cars, obstructing traffic, and get into loud drunk fights before and after midnight. I often found empty beer bottles, empty condom wrappers, cigarette butts, and empty crack baggies on the fence between the properties, mostly on Ivy's side of the fence. This is all important information. One Saturday, while having dinner at my mom's house, I heard a loud crash and my car alarm went off. I ran outside to see Ivy's older model Honda Accord back out of her parking space and speed down the street. Ivy's Accord had a dent from the front bumper to the door, and the headlight had popped out. I approached my Challenger with trepidation and screamed in anguish at what I saw. My car, my beautiful 3-week-old car with less than 500 miles on it, had a dent stretching from the passenger door to the front bumper, and the right front wheel was tilted at a 30-degree angle. I was livid and in anguish as I called the police, filed an online claim with my insurance, and arranged for a tow truck to take my damaged car to the dealership. The estimated cost of repairs came out to $3,400 USD. Total cost of repairs was eventually $6,500 USD. I had a low insurance deductible, $100 USD, but my car was parked and Ivy owed for the damages. For 2 weeks, I knocked on Ivy's door or waited for her to come home. She stopped driving her damaged Accord and either rented or borrowed a Ford Fusion. When she was home, she didn't answer the door. When she wasn't, she stayed away until my rental car, a Dodge Charger, left Mom's parking space. I left a note on Ivy's door for her to call me, but only received harassing calls from restricted phone numbers or people blaring air horns in my ears when I answered. The Revenge. About 2 weeks after the accident, Ivy's children came to my mom's house for some cookies. I noticed that 2 of them had bruises around their eyes. If Ivy hadn't hit my car, I still would have done what I did, but maybe not as underhandedly. I had my mom take pictures of all the children, but waited until the next party to strike. Ivy had a party that night or the night after. Mom called me to let me know, and I installed an app onto my phone that gave me a fake phone number. I called 911 and reported the party. There's a loud party at 1007 Mountain Drive, and I'm worried because the children are around all these drunk adults. Please hurry. Mom called to let me know the police had arrived. I drove to her house, stopping by the grocery store first, so that appeared to be the reason, and saw Ivy and her boyfriend Bane already sitting in the back of a squad car. From a news broadcast that night, I found out that Bane had warrants out for his arrest. Initially, the charges were disorderly conduct and disturbing the peace. However, Mom turned over photos of the children, anonymously mailing them through the post office with Ivy's address and name as the return address. Less than a week later, Ivy and Bane were charged with child abuse charges. I think Bane was charged with more severe charges as well for abusing Ivy's daughter. Either way, the children ended up in foster care, and Ivy and Bane ended up in prison. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I appreciate all the support from you guys. You guys are the best. Thank you so much again, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.